girl's quiet voice would soon echo across a continent. At the heart of Nairobi's grandest hotel among billionaires and politicians stood Amina, a waitress the world never saw. But fate was listening. When power mocked humility, she answered not with anger, but with wisdom, words inherited from a grandmother the city had forgotten. That night, the girl they laughed at became the one every nation applauded. This is the story of Amina Ndege, the girl who spoke for the silent. The Marula Grand Hotel shimmered like a diamond beneath Nairobi's rising sun. Tall, elegant, untouchable. Every morning its marble floors reflected the footsteps of the powerful, ministers, investors, celebrities, and those who believed their wealth could silence the world. Yet beneath that polished perfection worked people whose names no one cared to learn. Among them was Amina Ndege, a soft-spoken waitress whose voice barely rose above a whisper, yet whose eyes carried the quiet fire of someone who listened deeply to the world. Each day, she tied her hair in a neat bun, slipped on her white gloves, and began her shift with the same ritual, whispering her grandmother's prayer under her breath. May my tongue carry peace, and may my silence never be mistaken for weakness. Amina had learned 5 languages, not from books, but from people. From tourists, travelers, and the few kind guests who treated her as more than part of the furniture. She could speak to the Moroccan chef in Arabic, the Ghanaian musician in Twi, the French manager in a fluent Parisian accent. But what made her different wasn't her gift. It was her humility. She never boasted, never corrected, never complained. She simply served, quietly, gracefully, unseen. That morning, the hotel buzzed with unusual energy. The Pan-African Business and Culture Summit was about to begin, an event where billionaires and visionaries gathered to discuss African excellence. Ironically, the ones setting the tables and cleaning the glasses were the very Africans the elites rarely looked at. At 9 a.m., a black convoy rolled to a stop outside. Cameras flashed as Mr. Kofi Mensah stepped out, Ghana's most flamboyant billionaire. Tall, confident, wrapped in an imported Italian suit and arrogance, he smiled for the cameras, waving as if he owned the sun. Inside the hall, staff whispered nervously. Everyone knew his reputation. Proud, impatient, easily offended. Don't make a mistake around that man, the supervisor warned. He can end your job with one word. Amina nodded quietly, adjusting her tray. Fate, it seemed, was already turning its gaze toward her. By noon, the main banquet hall was alive. Laughter, the clinking of glasses, flashes of gold watches and designer perfumes blending into one dizzying orchestra of status. Amina moved between tables like a ghost, graceful, invisible, efficient. But near the head table sat the storm. Mr. Mensah, Madame Ayo Adeleke, and several foreign dignitaries. It was here that destiny decided to speak. As Amina leaned in to refill a glass of red wine, a sudden vibration from a photographer's flash startled her. The bottle tilted, just slightly, and a drop of wine fell onto the rim of Mr. Mensah's glass. The laughter at the table stopped. Silence, sharp as broken glass, filled the air. Mr. Mensah turned slowly, eyes narrowing at the trembling waitress beside him. You people, he said, voice thick with disdain. You can dress them in uniforms, train them in fancy hotels, but a village girl will always remain a village girl. A few guests chuckled nervously. Amina froze, her heart pounding. She opened her mouth to apologize, but her throat felt heavy, as if generations of silence held her voice captive. Then from across the table, Madame Ayo spoke softly. Mr. Mensah, she said, do you know the meaning of the proverb carved above the hotel entrance? He looked up, frowning. Something about unity, I suppose. Ayo smiled faintly. It says a tree cannot make a forest. It's written in Kikuyu, the language of this land. The billionaire scoffed. Languages of poverty, he muttered, sipping his drink. The words sliced through Amina like knives. Something inside her, something her grandmother had buried years ago, began to stir. She stepped forward, her voice trembling at first, then steady. Excuse me, sir, she said. The proverb means no one stands alone, no matter their wealth or power. Her words came in soft Swahili first, then English, then French. The root of that saying, she continued, is older than all our gold. It reminds us that even a king must thank the soil he walks on. The table fell silent. Mr. Mensah blinked, unsure whether to be angry or embarrassed. Madame Ayo leaned forward, smiling with quiet pride. "Beautifully said, my dear," she murmured. Across the hall, a few guests clapped politely, unsure if they had just witnessed courage or foolishness. Amina bowed slightly and stepped back, heart racing. She expected punishment, maybe dismissal. Instead, something unexpected happened. From a corner of the room, Inspector Leroy Moyo, a tall, calm man in a gray suit, had been watching. He took out a small notepad and wrote a single line. Staff intervention. Unscripted cultural authenticity. Amina returned to her duties, hands shaking. But as the evening went on, whispers spread like wildfire. "Did you hear what the waitress said? She spoke 6 languages. She quoted proverbs like a professor." What began as humiliation had become rumor, and rumor was the spark of something greater. By the time the banquet ended, her story had already traveled from table to table, phone to phone. Guests whispered about the girl who speaks for Africa. Amina walked home that night through Nairobi's glowing streets, her shoes worn, her spirit heavy but alive. At her small apartment, she placed her grandmother's bracelet on the table and whispered, "Bibi, I didn't stay silent today." The city lights flickered like stars above her. Far away, in hotel offices and government halls, powerful men discussed profit and progress. None of them knew that the true story of the summit had already begun, not in their speeches, but in the heart of a girl the world had ignored. And soon, the world would hear her voice. Morning arrived wrapped in golden silence. The Marula Grand was not a hotel that woke gently. It came alive like a kingdom. The sound of footsteps echoed through marble corridors, silver trays clinked, and voices rehearsed polite greetings. The summit's second day was about to begin, and this time the air was thicker with tension than perfume. Amina arrived before dawn. Her heart still carried the echoes of last night's confrontation. Every word, every laugh, every tremor in her voice when she dared to speak. She had survived the humiliation, but she didn't know if she had also sparked trouble. "Girl, you were brave," whispered Grace, the pastry attendant, as she arranged fruit on a platter. Amina smiled faintly. "Or foolish," she replied. Grace shook her head. "Sometimes, the world needs fools to tell the truth." As the staff worked, whispers drifted among them, about a man with a notebook who had been watching during the banquet. "Inspector Moyo," said the chef in hushed tones. "He's the one from the African Excellence Council. They say he grades hotels on more than food. He tests their heart." No one knew what that meant exactly, but it carried weight, the kind of rumor that made even the proud managers nervous. By 8 o'clock, guests began arriving again. The grand lobby glittered with African art and international pride. Flags of 50 nations waved gently in the morning light, and behind every flag stood a staff member polishing glassware, folding napkins, or adjusting microphones. They were the invisible pillars holding up the pride of the continent, but still invisible all the same. Amina was assigned to serve at the conference wing. Her section was the most delicate, the VIP table for senior delegates, including Mr. Mensah, Madame Ayo, and Inspector Moyo himself. When she heard his name on the list, her heart skipped a beat. Would he remember her? Would he report her for interrupting the billionaire? She whispered another prayer, the same one her grandmother taught her in Kiswahili. "Let my voice serve the truth, even if it trembles." The morning session began with speeches. Ministers spoke of progress. CEOs promised investments. But to Amina, their words sounded hollow. Polished performances disconnected from the streets she walked every night. Madame Ayo, however, was different. Her voice carried warmth, strength, and wisdom, like a mother speaking to all of Africa at once. "Excellence," she said, "is not born in boardrooms. It grows from how we treat those we believe are beneath us." Applause filled the room, but not everyone clapped. Mr. Mensah sat back with his arms crossed, unmoved. His pride was a fortress, and last night's embarrassment had built its walls higher. When Amina approached to refill his glass of water, he didn't even look at her. "You should thank me," he muttered under his breath. She froze. "Sir?" "For teaching you that silence doesn't make you wise," he said coldly. "It only hides ignorance." Her lips pressed together. She wanted to defend herself, to remind him that arrogance is the loudest form of ignorance. But she said nothing. Her grandmother's voice whispered in her memory, "When pride shouts, humility listens." Listening is how truth learns to speak. Amina bowed slightly and moved on. But from across the room, Inspector Moyo's eyes followed the exchange. He wrote another quiet note in his leather-bound book. At noon, the conference paused for lunch. Staff hurried to prepare the dining hall again. Tablecloths straightened, centerpieces arranged, cutlery polished until it reflected every face that passed. Amina and Grace worked side by side, whispering between tasks. "You think that inspector will report us?" Grace asked nervously. "I don't know," Amina said. "Maybe he already has," Grace sighed. "Then let's serve well today. If we go down with pride." Before Amina could reply, a manager rushed in, pale and sweating. "Everyone, listen!" he shouted. "The inspector has requested a live evaluation this afternoon, in front of the guests." Gasps filled the room. "What kind of evaluation?" "They're calling it the cultural sensitivity test. He'll test how well we represent African values and respect among staff and guests. Every hotel participating in the summit will be scored." The room buzzed with anxiety. This wasn't in the schedule. No one had rehearsed for it. "Why today?" Someone groaned. "Because of yesterday," whispered the chef. "They want to see how we treat our own." Amina's heart pounded. It was her fault, or so she believed. One small act of courage had turned into a storm. At 2:00 sharp, the test began. The hall had been transformed into a stage. Cameras, notepads, and judges filled the corners. Every hotel's representative stood before the audience, ready to present how they embodied African unity through service, respect, and authenticity. Marula Grand, being the host hotel, was scheduled last. Mr. Mensah, though technically a guest, had volunteered himself to lead the presentation. "Let me handle this," he said proudly. "You can't trust a waitress to represent us before ministers and media." The manager, too nervous to argue, agreed. So the billionaire took the stage, confident, loud, polished, and began his speech. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mensah boomed, "this hotel stands as a beacon of African success. We serve with precision, elegance, and international excellence." He spoke for 10 minutes, not once mentioning his staff. Behind the curtain, Amina and the others watched silently, their hearts sinking. Then came the inspector's first question. "Mr. Mensah," said Moyo calmly, "how does your team demonstrate respect across language and culture? Can you show us, not tell us, what unity looks like in practice?" Mensah smiled thinly. "Of course," he said, gesturing to a random waiter. "You there, greet this delegate in Swahili." The young man stammered, unsure of what to say. Mensah scowled. "See? We train them, but they forget. Anyway, it's not important. Service is universal." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Inspector Moyo's brow furrowed. Madame Ayo crossed her arms. "Mr. Mensah," she said softly, "perhaps you might let the staff speak for themselves." He hesitated, visibly annoyed, but nodded. "Fine. Who among you thinks they can do better?" Silence. No one moved. Every staff member feared his wrath, except one. Amina stepped forward. The audience gasped softly as the waitress from the previous night walked onto the stage. Mensah's jaw tightened. "You again," he hissed under his breath. But Inspector Moyo gestured encouragingly. "Let her speak." Amina faced the audience, her heart thundering. She could feel 1,000 eyes watching, some curious, some doubtful, some cruel. But then she remembered her grandmother's words. Courage is not loud. It is the voice that speaks when the soul refuses to stay silent. Taking a deep breath, she began. "In Africa," she said, her voice trembling at first, "we speak in many tongues. But every language carries the same word for respect. Silence when elders speak, kindness to strangers, and gratitude to the soil that feeds us." She turned to a delegate from Morocco and greeted him in Arabic. To a woman from Senegal, in Wolof, to a Ghanaian representative, in Twi. And finally, to the audience, in Swahili, "Karibu Nyumbani." "Welcome home," her words flowed like music. The room fell utterly still. Even the lights seemed to soften, as if listening. Then, suddenly, a man in the front row, a delegate from Mali, stood, eyes glistening. He spoke rapidly in Bambara, his voice trembling with emotion. The crowd murmured. No one understood him. But Amina did. She walked down from the stage, placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, and whispered back in his language. Whatever she said made him weep. He covered his face, saying softly, "For the first time in years, someone heard me." The audience erupted into applause, thunderous, genuine, unstoppable. Madame Ayo wiped a tear. Inspector Moyo stood, notebook closed, his expression unreadable but his eyes shining. Mr. Mensah's face was drained of color. The camera lights caught every twitch of his discomfort. Amina looked up, her chest rising and falling, the weight of generations lifted from her heart. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was the voice of the silent, the bridge between tongues, hearts, and worlds. That night, Nairobi glowed brighter than usual. Clips of Amina's performance flooded social media within hours. Who is she? Where did she learn all those languages? She spoke for Africa itself. The hashtag, the girl who spoke for the silent, began trending across the continent. In Accra, Lagos, Johannesburg, and Cairo, her video played on screens in taxis, classrooms, and cafes. People saw more than a girl in uniform. They saw themselves, their mothers, sisters, and daughters who had been told to stay quiet. In a quiet corner of his suite, Inspector Moyo watched the video again. He smiled softly, then dialed a number on his phone. "Madame Ayo," he said, "I believe we have found our ambassador." The morning after the viral storm, the Marula Grand Hotel felt different. There was an electricity in the air, the kind that hums quietly before thunder. Every phone in the staff lounge buzzed with notifications. Clips of Amina's speech were everywhere, on Instagram Reels, WhatsApp statuses, TikTok, and even the evening news. "Meet Amina Ndege," the anchor said. "The waitress whose words have united Africa." Grace burst into the staff kitchen, waving her phone. "Look, you're famous." Amina blinked, watching herself on the screen, standing tall, speaking softly, eyes glowing with conviction. "That's not fame," she murmured, shaking her head. "That's just truth that people finally heard. But fame, like fire, spreads faster than understanding." Within hours, journalists began calling the hotel. Guests wanted to meet the multilingual waitress. Tourists snapped photos with her. Some staff congratulated her, others whispered behind her back. And among the whispers were seeds of envy. "She thinks she's a celebrity now. Wait till the bosses see her pride. Watch. They'll fire her for stealing attention." Amina tried to stay calm, to keep working as before, but her quiet world had been cracked open, and not everyone celebrated the light that came through. By noon, the general manager summoned her to his office. She walked in, hands trembling. Behind the desk sat not only the manager, but also Mr. Kofi Mensah, his eyes cold as stone. "So," Mensah began, "the internet has crowned you a hero." Amina bowed slightly. "I never asked for that, sir." He smirked. "No, but you enjoyed it, didn't you? All that applause, all that attention. Tell me, how does it feel to embarrass your superiors on live broadcast?" She looked down. "I only spoke the truth," Mensah's voice sharpened. "Truth, or rebellion dressed as humility?" The manager coughed nervously. "Mr. Mensah, please." But Mensah raised a hand. "No, this is what's wrong with our youth. They confuse disrespect with courage." Amina's chest ached. "Sir, I meant no disrespect." Mensah leaned forward, his eyes burning. "You made me look like a fool. You made us all look like fools. And now you think you're some kind of African prophet." Her throat tightened. "I just wanted to remind people that respect is part of our culture." Mensah laughed bitterly. "Culture doesn't pay bills. Respect doesn't build hotels. Power does." He stood abruptly and turned to the manager. "Fire her, immediately." The room froze. The manager looked torn. "Sir, that might attract bad press. She's trending across Africa." "I don't care." Mensah snapped. "This hotel runs on order, not emotions." "She's done." For a long moment, silence filled the room, until a calm voice spoke from the doorway. "Actually," said Inspector Leroy Moyo, stepping in, "she's just getting started." Mensah turned, startled. "You again? What is this, a circus?" Moyo smiled politely. "The council received thousands of letters overnight praising this hotel, because of her. I'm here to announce that Marula Grand undone his empire of arrogance." For the first time, the mighty Mr. Mensah was speechless. By evening, the hotel corridors buzzed with rumors. Papers were being seized, files photographed. Staff whispered behind half-closed doors. Grace caught sight of Amina in the lobby, clutching her cleaning apron nervously. "What's happening?" Amina asked. Grace whispered. They're saying Mensa's under investigation. The inspector found evidence of stolen summit funds. Amina's heart sank. Oh no, I never wanted this. Grace shook her head. You didn't cause it, Amina. Truth simply found its voice through you. Amina looked toward the glass wall overlooking the city. Sometimes, she murmured, the light hurts before it heals. 2 days later, a special hearing was held at the City Hall, broadcast live across Kenya. The Council of Ethics and Tourism summoned both Mensa and Amina to testify. Outside, a sea of journalists, activists, and ordinary citizens filled the streets. Handmade signs rose above the crowd, justice for the humble. Truth has no rank. Speak for the silent. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Mensa sat at the front, dressed impeccably in a gray suit, but his eyes betrayed sleepless nights. Amina, sitting quietly a few rows behind, wore a plain navy dress and her grandmother's bracelet. She did not come to gloat. She came to understand. Inspector Moyo opened the proceedings. He spoke not as an enforcer, but as a witness to a transformation. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is not just about stolen money. It is about stolen dignity, about how arrogance blinds leaders and how truth, even whispered by the meek, can shake empires. He turned toward Mensa. Mr. Mensa, you managed the Marula Grant for 10 years. You were trusted with the image of this nation during the summit. Yet our audit found millions diverted to shell accounts. Do you deny this? Mensa swallowed hard. I delegated responsibilities. My subordinates handled the transfers. Moyo nodded. And yet every signature belongs to you. He placed a document before the council. Bold black ink, unmistakable. Mensa's signature stared back at him like a ghost from his own hand. The murmurs in the room grew louder. Mensa's lips trembled. It wasn't greed, he said, almost whispering. It was survival, pressure, expectations. Moyo's eyes softened slightly. Then perhaps you understand now what that young woman meant when she said, respect doesn't build towers. Power does. You chose towers. She chose the truth. Mensa's shoulders slumped. The fight drained out of him. The council chair leaned forward. Mr. Mensa, do you have anything to say before we deliver our verdict? Mensa turned slowly, his eyes finding Amina's in the crowd. For the first time, he didn't see a servant. He saw a mirror. I once believed power was everything, he said quietly. That obedience mattered more than fairness. That the world respected fear. But now, I see that all I built was noise. Empty noise. He paused, voice trembling. And she, that girl, carried more dignity in her silence than I did in my speeches. The room fell utterly still. Mensa lowered his head. I accept the consequences. The council chair nodded solemnly. Then so it shall be. Mr. Mensa, you are hereby relieved of your duties and banned from holding any executive position within the tourism or hospitality sector for the next 10 years. The misappropriated funds will be recovered through asset seizure. The gavel struck once, sharp and final. Outside, the crowd erupted. Reporters swarmed. Some cheered for justice. Others cried for redemption, but Amina didn't smile. She stood quietly, hands clasped. Grace found her in the crowd. You did it, she said tearfully. Amina shook her head. No, truth did. Just then, a camera crew approached her. Miss Ndich, what do you want to say to the people after this historic verdict? Amina hesitated, then spoke softly. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means refusing to become what hurt you. I hope Mr. Mensa finds peace, because justice is not revenge. It's healing. The reporter's eyes glistened. The quote would headline the next day's paper. Weeks passed. The city calmed. The hotel underwent new management, and Amina's life took another unexpected turn. She received a letter, stamped with the gold emblem of the Pan-African Cultural Council. Inside, a handwritten note from Inspector Moyo read, Your story awakened more than applause. It awakened a movement. We are founding the Voices of Dignity initiative to train youth in leadership, ethics, and language preservation. We would be honored if you served as its first cultural ambassador. Tears filled her eyes as she reread the words. The same girl once told she was just a maid was now being asked to guide leaders. Grace squealed when she heard. Ambassador Amina. Imagine that. Amina laughed shyly. No, Grace, not ambassador. Just a servant of truth. On the day of her inauguration, the event hall was filled with faces. Diplomats, journalists, villagers, teachers, students, all drawn to her light. Madame Ayo Adeleke, radiant in a gold wrapper, sat proudly in the front row. Inspector Moyo stood beside the stage, hands clasped behind his back. As Amina stepped forward, applause rippled through the room. But before she spoke, she looked around, not at the cameras, but at the faces that reminded shortlisted for the African Excellence Honorary Award. The manager gasped. Mensah's jaw tightened. And, Moyo continued, the council requests that Amina Ndege represent the hotel in the final cultural evaluation round tomorrow. For a second, the world seemed to stop spinning. Amina blinked. Me? Moyo nodded. Yes, you will speak before the council and foreign delegates at the summit's closing ceremony. Mensah's fist slammed against the desk. Over my dead body. Moyo's eyes hardened. You don't own excellence, Mr. Mensah. Africa does. He turned to Amina and bowed slightly, a rare gesture of respect. Prepare well, Miss Ndege. The continent will be watching. That night, Amina couldn't sleep. The city outside her window buzzed with life. Laughter, car horns, distant music. But her mind was filled with doubt. She sat by the small wooden table in her room, her grandmother's bracelet wrapped around her wrist, whispering the old prayer again and again. Her grandmother's voice echoed in memory, soft, wise, full of love. When the world notices you, child, remember fame is a shadow. Only light creates it. Stay light. Amina closed her eyes, whispering, Bibi, guide me. Then came a knock. When she opened the door, she found Madame Ayo Adeleke standing there, wrapped in a colorful Ankara shawl, smiling warmly. A little bird told me you could use some guidance, Ayo said. Amina's eyes widened. Madame Ayo, you came all the way here? I didn't come for the summit, Ayo replied softly. I came for you. They sat together under the dim lamp, and Ayo listened as Amina poured her heart out, her fear, her confusion, her guilt for causing trouble. When Amina finished, Ayo smiled gently. Do you know why your words moved millions? She asked. Amina shook her head. Because they were not yours alone, Ayo said. They carried your grandmother's wisdom, your people's pride, and every woman who was ever told to stay silent. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small notebook. Take this, she said. It's blank. Write tomorrow's speech in it. But don't write to impress them. Write to heal them. Tears filled Amina's eyes. Thank you, Mama. Ayo placed a hand on her shoulder. Remember, speak with heart, not hunger for applause. The truth doesn't need permission. By morning, the news had exploded. Waitress from Nairobi to represent Africa in Global Summit. The girl who spoke for the silent to address council. Outside the hotel, reporters waited. Inside, staff whispered as she walked by. Grace squeezed her hand. You're carrying all of us, Amina, but not everyone was smiling. Mensah, humiliated, plotted in silence. His pride could not bear the idea that a mere waitress had outshone him. He made a few phone calls, to old friends in the media, to businessmen, to anyone willing to spin the story differently. By noon, online rumors began spreading. She didn't learn those languages. She used AI translation. She's being used as a PR stunt. The tide began to shift. Amina's phone buzzed with cruel messages. You're fake. You embarrassed Africa. Stay in your lane. Her hands shook. For the first time since her rise, tears rolled down her face. She wanted to disappear, to return to the quiet safety of anonymity. But then she remembered Ayo's words. Write to heal them. She opened the notebook, took a deep breath, and began to write. To those who doubt me, I say this. I was born in a small house where rain sang louder than radios. My first teachers were not professors. They were neighbors, travelers, and songs carried by the wind. I learned languages not to impress, but to understand. If my voice shakes, it is because it carries many others who still cannot speak. She closed the notebook, exhaled deeply, and for the first time felt peace. The next evening arrived, the closing ceremony of the summit. The stage was grander, the audience larger, the atmosphere tense. Every major media outlet in Africa was broadcasting live. Delegates, presidents, ministers, all sat waiting to hear from the girl who had become a symbol of humility and unity. Amina stood backstage, dressed in a simple cream gown gifted by the hotel staff. Not designer, but radiant. Grace adjusted her scarf and whispered, "Remember who you are." Amina smiled faintly. "A girl who speaks for the silent," the announcer's voice boomed. "Please welcome Ms. Amina Ndege, representing Marula Grand Hotel and the voice of Africa's new generation." Applause thundered through the hall. Amina stepped onto the stage, the lights blinding but warm. She clutched her grandmother's bracelet, feeling its familiar texture against her skin, and began, "Good evening, respected leaders, elders, and brothers and sisters from every corner of this great continent. I stand here not as a representative of any hotel, nor as a scholar, nor as a star. I stand here as the daughter of a woman who washed clothes for others, but taught me the value of words." The hall grew still. When I was a child, my grandmother told me that every language is a heartbeat. Lose it and the heart of your people grows weaker. But speak it with kindness, and you keep their memory alive. She paused, her eyes shining. "I have served water to the rich and the poor, and I have learned that thirst speaks the same language everywhere. What makes us African is not our wealth, it is our warmth. Not our accents, but our empathy." A hush swept over the room. In the front row, Inspector Moyo's gaze softened. Even Mensa, seated stiffly beside the manager, looked shaken. Amina continued, her voice steady now, clear, melodic, carrying the rhythm of every language she knew. "Let us never build towers so tall that we can no longer hear the voices at the ground, for those voices are the foundation of who we are." Her final words landed like a prayer. May Africa never forget the sound of her own heart, beating in every tongue, every song, and every silent soul waiting to be heard. Silence, then thunder. Applause roared across the hall. People stood, clapping, cheering, some crying. The cameras flashed. Ayo wiped her eyes. Inspector Moyo nodded approvingly. And for the first time, even Mr. Mensa stood, slowly, reluctantly, and clapped. Backstage, as the ceremony ended, Moyo approached her with a smile. "Congratulations, Miss Ndege. You didn't just pass the test, you redefined it." He handed her a sealed envelope. "Inside is your official invitation to the Council of Cultural Ambassadors." Amina's hands trembled. I don't know what to say." "Then don't," Moyo said kindly. "You've already said enough for a lifetime." Outside, the night sky over Nairobi glittered like 1,000 blessings. In the distance, church bells echoed, mixing with the hum of celebration. For one brief eternal moment, it felt as though the entire continent was breathing in unison, listening not to power, but to peace. But far away, in a dim hotel corridor, Mensa watched the news feed on his tablet, Amina's speech replaying again and again. Each word was a mirror, showing him what pride had blinded him to see. And for the first time in his life, he felt something unfamiliar. Shame. He turned off the screen, exhaled deeply, and whispered to himself, "Perhaps." The girl was right. Main body, part 3. The next morning, Nairobi woke up to a different rhythm. Newspapers bore headlines that felt like hymns. Amina Ndege inspires a continent, from Waitress to Voice of Africa. Her words, our reflection. Everywhere she went, people recognized her. Taxi drivers honked in support, street vendors waved, and old women prayed blessings upon her name. But amid the celebration, shadows lingered, because not everyone was rejoicing. Deep inside the executive wing of the Marula Grand Hotel, tension crackled like a storm cloud ready to burst. Mr. Mensa sat at his mahogany desk, staring at the TV as Amina's face filled the screen once again. His jaw tightened. His pride, that silent tyrant inside him, refused to bow. He switched off the television, muttering, "A maid with manners now thinks she can school me about values." But the truth gnawed at him. Every word she'd spoken at the summit echoed in the hollow chambers of his heart. That afternoon, an unmarked black car pulled up at the hotel entrance. Out stepped Inspector Leroy Moyo, flanked by 2 officers. They headed straight to the manager's office, ignoring the startled receptionists. Mensa's heart sank when he saw them. "Inspector, what brings you here again?" Moyo placed a folder on the desk. "An investigation, Mr. Mensa. The council received reports of financial mismanagement in your department. Misuse of summit funds, forged expense receipts, and bribery in vendor selections." Mensa's face paled. That's preposterous. Then you won't mind if we review the records, Moyo said calmly. The manager looked nervous, hands trembling. Sir, I didn't know. Mensah slammed his fist on the table. This is nonsense. I have connections at the ministry, Moyo interrupted, his voice steady but sharp. No connection stands taller than truth, Mr. Mensah. You of all people should have learned that from her. The words hit harder than any accusation. Her, the girl he had fired. The girl whose humility had undone his empire, reminded her of home, her grandmother, her neighbors, the women who taught her humility through hardship. She began. Once, I believed the smallest voice could never move mountains. But now I know. Mountains move when the smallest voices join together. She glanced toward Ao. I am not the story. We are. Her voice deepened with emotion. For too long, dignity has been treated like a luxury. But it is the birthright of every African soul, rich or poor, maid or master. The crowd murmured in awe. Ayo's eyes shone with tears. Amina continued. Let this initiative remind every child from Lagos to Lusaka, from Nairobi to Cape Town. You are enough. You do not need wealth to speak the truth. You do not need a title to serve light. Thunderous applause filled the hall. That night, as the city lights blinked below her balcony, Amina stood alone, her bracelet glimmering softly under the moon. She whispered, We did it, Bibi. The silent have spoken. The wind rustled through the trees, almost answering her. Then she looked up, to see the faint glow of fireflies over the city skyline, blinking like stars that had descended to witness her journey. But far away, beyond the crowd and lights, in a quiet apartment, Mensah watched the ceremony on TV. He was no longer the proud executive. He sat alone, humbled, reflective, a man stripped of titles but not hope. When Amina said the words forgiveness is healing, he felt something break and then mend within him. He whispered to the screen, Thank you, child. You saved more than a hotel. You saved a soul. And so, from the humblest of beginnings, a hotel made with a heart full of language, a movement was born. It was not about fame or rebellion. It was about dignity, the quiet revolution that begins when one person chooses courage over comfort. And somewhere deep within Africa's beating heart, another young girl watching Amina's story on her cracked phone whispered to herself, Someday, I'll speak too. Months passed. The rains came and went. Nairobi glistened, cleansed, reborn, alive. Billboards now carried a different kind of image, not of products or politicians, but faces of young men and women holding placards that read, I speak for the silent. Dignity is my language. Truth is my accent. The Voices of Dignity initiative had grown beyond anyone's imagination. It started as a small program in one city, then spread to Kampala, Accra, Kigali, and Lagos. By the end of the year, over 30 schools across Africa had joined the movement, and at the heart of it all was Amina Ndege. Still humble, still grounded, but now walking through airports and conferences as a symbol of what integrity could look like in a continent tired of corruption and fear. She no longer wore the hotel apron, but she still carried the same notebook that Madame Ayo had given her, its first page now framed in her office. Write not to impress, but to heal. One morning, Amina received a letter with no return address. It was written in careful handwriting, slightly shaky, as if the writer had wrestled with every word. Miss Ndege, I do not know if you will read this. I do not deserve your forgiveness, but I must ask for it anyway. I have been attending rehabilitation sessions, not for alcohol or drugs, but for pride. The program calls it moral recovery. Every night I rewatch your speech at the summit. It humbles me. I am rebuilding my life quietly now, helping young hotel workers start small businesses. I wanted to thank you for showing me that strength doesn't roar. Sometimes it kneels. Kofi Mensah. Amina read the letter twice, tears tracing soft rivers down her cheeks. She whispered, then the healing has truly begun. That evening she called Madame Ayo. He wrote to me, Amina said. Ayo smiled gently. Then you gave him what no punishment could, peace. I want to meet him, Amina added. Not as a victim, as a friend, Ayo nodded. Then go. True forgiveness is not a word. It's a walk. 2 weeks later, Amina traveled to Takoradi, Ghana, Mensah's hometown. The coastal air smelled of salt and redemption. She found him at a community training center, teaching a group of young apprentices how to manage a small guest house with honesty and heart. When he looked up and saw her, time seemed to stop. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Mensa removed his cap and bowed deeply. "I didn't expect you would come," Amina smiled softly. "Neither did I. But the wind brought me here." They sat under a baobab tree where the sea breeze carried distant laughter. "I thought you'd hate me," Mensa said quietly. "I did, for a day," she admitted. "Then I realized hate only delays healing," he nodded slowly. "I lost everything I thought made me strong. But it turns out strength was sitting in my heart all along, covered in dust." Amina reached into her bag and handed him something. Her grandmother's bracelet. His eyes widened. "No, that's sacred," she smiled. "So is forgiveness. Keep it until you forgive yourself." Mensa's eyes filled with tears. He clutched the bracelet like a relic of grace. "Thank you," he whispered. "You freed me." From that meeting, a new chapter began, not just for them, but for the continent itself. Together, Amina and Mensa started a new project, the Bridge Initiative. It united business owners, hotel workers, artists, and local leaders to create spaces of dialogue between the powerful and the powerless. Their first conference in Accra drew hundreds, janitors, executives, and students sitting side by side, listening, sharing stories, and finding common ground. Amina began her speech there with simple words. "If I could speak every language on earth but have no compassion, my voice would still be empty." The hall erupted in applause, but she raised her hand gently. "Please do not clap for me. Clap for yourselves, for listening." Mensa stood at the edge of the stage, watching her with quiet pride. He no longer sought the spotlight. His redemption lay in the shadows, mentoring, repairing, teaching humility. Months rolled into a year. The Voices of Dignity Network now reached universities, rural villages, and even prisons. Former inmates were being trained in hospitality and language learning, using Amina's model of empathy-based communication. News anchors began calling it the Dignity Wave, but Amina avoided interviews. "I am not a wave," she often said. "I am the shore. Waves come and go. The shore stays listening." One day, she was invited to speak at the African Union Annual Summit in Addis Ababa, this time not as a cultural representative, but as a continental advisor on human development. The theme, building a future where every voice matters. The grand hall was silent as she walked to the podium, now confident but still humble, her voice carrying that same melody that first touched the world. She began. "When I stood at a hotel podium 2 years ago, I thought I was just defending a child. I didn't know I was defending a continent's conscience. Today, I come not as a hero, but as a reminder that progress without empathy is still poverty." She paused, scanning the crowd of presidents and ministers. "Our children do not need more speeches. They need examples. Let our governments learn from our waiters. Let our leaders learn from our cleaners. Because dignity has no uniform." The audience rose in a thunderous ovation. Even seasoned politicians wiped their eyes. At that moment, Amina wasn't just a speaker. She was a mirror, showing Africa its own beauty, resilience, and compassion. After the summit, Amina visited her home village in Kisi. The small house where her grandmother once sang still stood, though the roof was rusted. Children ran barefoot through the fields, shouting her name, "Mama Dignity!" She laughed, hugged them, and shared stories under the same mango tree where she once dreamed of the world beyond. An elderly woman approached her, wrinkled but radiant. "My child," she said, holding her hand. "Your grandmother would have danced today." Amina smiled, looking at the sky. "She already is." Later that evening, she sat by the window, writing in her old notebook. Her words were no longer uncertain. They flowed with peace. Maybe the purpose of a voice is not to be heard by all, but to heal the one who needs it most. I once spoke for the silent. Now I listen, for the silenced dreams waiting to be reborn. She closed the notebook, her heart full. Outside, the village drum began its evening rhythm, a song of unity and homecoming. In the distance, church bells mingled with the calls of night birds, and somewhere, She imagined her grandmother whispering. Light creates its own echo. Meanwhile, in Takoradi, Mensa continued his quiet mission. His training center had grown, now called the House of Second Chances. Young men and women learned not just hospitality, but humanity. He hung the bracelet on the wall, framed behind glass beneath a small plaque that read, "Given by forgiveness, kept by grace." Some tone and rewatched the video of Amina's first speech. He no longer saw a waitress correcting a guest. He saw a generation correcting history. One evening, Amina received a call. It was Mensa's assistant. "Ma'am, I'm afraid Mr. Mensa passed peacefully this morning. Heart failure. He wanted you to have something." Days later, a parcel arrived. Inside, a letter and a small wooden box. The letter read, "My dear Amina, thank you for teaching me that dignity is not lost, only forgotten. In this box is the key to the House of Second Chances. Promise me you'll keep its doors open, not for my name, but for the nameless." Inside the box, alongside the key, was her grandmother's bracelet, polished, glowing faintly in the light. Amina wept quietly. She wore it again that night, whispering, "The circle is complete." A year later, the House of Second Chances was renamed the Amina Mensa Foundation for Ethical Leadership. It became a sanctuary for dreamers, for the broken, for the silenced, where maids became managers, where the poor found purpose, and where humility stood taller than power. Every graduation ceremony began with her words etched above the entrance. "Let the smallest voice speak, and the world will listen." As the sun set over Nairobi one evening, Amina stood on a rooftop overlooking the bustling streets below. Buses roared, children laughed, and vendors shouted prices in a chorus of languages. She smiled. This was her music now. Grace joined her, carrying 2 cups of chai. "Do you ever miss the hotel days?" she asked. Amina chuckled. "Sometimes. It was simpler then. But simplicity doesn't mean silence." Grace grinned. "So what's next?" Amina looked at the horizon. "The next story isn't mine," she said softly. "It belongs to whoever dares to speak next." They clinked their cups and watched as the first stars appeared. Tiny lights, whispering that even in darkness, voices could still shine. The sun rose differently that morning. It didn't just rise over Nairobi. It seemed to rise from within it. For the first time in years, the city didn't hum with just the noise of traffic or ambition. It pulsed with something deeper. Reflection. Screens across the continent still played Amina's speech. News anchors repeated her words with awe, while translators struggled to capture the power behind her voice. It wasn't the eloquence of a scholar, nor the authority of power. It was the truth, naked, pure, undeniable.
In Ghana, a university professor told his students, "This is how language becomes freedom." In Nigeria, market women shared the clip on their phones, smiling proudly. "She spoke like us," they said, "with our hearts." And in a small village,
In Tanzania, a grandmother told her grandchildren, "Remember her name." She reminded the world that silence is not weakness. It is the breath before wisdom. At the Marula Grand Hotel, the golden banners that once celebrated wealth now bore a new inscription, Amina's words engraved in marble. A voice born from humility can shake the pillars of power. The management turned her modest speech into a yearly scholarship, the Naji Fellowship, for underprivileged girls across Africa who dreamed of studying culture, language, and social reform. For every life that walked through that doorway, Amina's story was no longer just an event, it was a calling. Mr. Kofi Mensah, whose arrogance had once filled the hall, returned quietly months later. The billionaire who had mocked her now stood at the base of the engraving, reading the words over and over again. He didn't speak to the press. He didn't announce donations. He simply removed his diamond pin, placed it at the foot of the wall, and whispered, "Forgive the blindness of pride." That was all. But it was enough. Meanwhile, Amina's life transformed in ways she never imagined. Not with riches, but with reverence. Universities invited her to speak. NGOs sought her insight on language and empathy and leadership. But Amina remained the same. Grounded, simple, quietly radiant. She still lived in the same neighborhood, still took the bus, still greeted the fruit seller by name every morning. When asked why she refused luxury, she always smiled and said, "Because my grandmother's spirit walks where humility lives." One evening, under the same acacia tree where she once read her grandmother's letters, Amina met with Inspector Moyo. The city was calmer now, safer, more awake to its conscience. "You changed everything," he told her softly. She shook her head. "No, I only reminded them to listen." Moyo looked toward the horizon where the skyline glowed in orange light. "Do you think they will keep listening?" Amina smiled. "If we keep speaking from truth, not anger, yes. Africa is beginning to remember her voice." That night, rain fell, not harshly but gently, like the sky blessing the soil. As the drops touched her skin, Amina remembered her grandmother's last words. "Child, when the world forgets its song, sing softly until it remembers." Now, standing beneath the rainfall, she realized what it meant. Her grandmother wasn't talking about music. She was talking about legacy. It wasn't about fame or applause. It was about giving courage to those who came after, to the maids, the drivers, the farmers, the dreamers who believed that being unseen meant being unworthy. Amina had taught them that even the smallest voice, when rooted in truth, could echo louder than all the speeches of the powerful. Months later, at the next Pan-African Summit, something extraordinary happened. The organizers opened with a tribute, not to a president or tycoon, but to Amina Ndege, daughter of the soil. A choir of children sang in Swahili, Zulu, Yoruba, and French, blending languages like rivers flowing into one ocean. The audience wept, not out of sadness, but pride. For in that harmony, they heard the continent healing. When Amina stepped onto the stage, barefoot, wrapped in a simple Ankara shawl, the applause felt like thunder rolling across nations. She didn't read a speech. She simply said, "If my voice can be heard, then so can yours. Let us build a continent where kindness is strength, where humility leads, and where no one must shout to be seen." The hall rose in silence, that rare sacred silence when truth becomes a prayer. Years later, when people spoke of revolutions, they mentioned leaders and presidents. But in the hearts of the people, they spoke of a waitress, the girl who turned shame into strength and silence into power. In time, schools across Africa began teaching the Ndege principle, a philosophy of leadership through empathy and cultural pride. Her story became legend, told in villages, classrooms, and bedtime tales, where grandmothers whispered her name beside the fire. And somewhere, deep within the rhythm of drums, markets, and prayers, the spirit of Africa smiled again. No longer waiting to be heard, but speaking in its own beautiful, unstoppable voice. When the world measures greatness by gold, remember that hearts measure it by grace. Amina's story reminds us that silence is not defeat. It is the soil from which courage grows. And when one person dares to speak truth with humility, the world is never the same again. If Amina's story touched your heart, share it, so her voice can keep echoing. Let's keep telling the stories of those the world forgets, the waitresses, the dreamers, the silent heroes who change history with kindness. Subscribe to African Black Tales for more stories of courage, redemption, and the unstoppable spirit of Africa. And in our next story, another voice will rise from the streets of Lagos, where a street boy's act of honesty will challenge an empire built on lies. Stay tuned.